So I'm not much of a podium person, but I think for you to hear me, I'll have to stand here. So if I start to wander for some reason and you can't hear me, just let me know. It's wonderful to be in New York with all of you. Thank you for not being in the single digits this week. I was watching the news about 3 weeks ago and was like, wow, I hope it warms up. Was very happy. I'm from Oregon, so that whole snow, 0 degrees kind of thing freaks me out. I've been in the B2B software industry for pretty much my entire career. I've spent the last 17 and a half years in the security industry. And during that time, I've met with hundreds, probably well over thousands of customers at this point. And one of the discussions that we often have with customers is how can they get greater capacity out of the resources that they have on their teams, whether that be software resources, human resources, et cetera. And obviously, one of the discussions you end up having is automation. And I find that when I talk with the security teams in organizations, there's a reticence to embrace broad-scale automation, which seems counterintuitive, because if you're trying to increase capacity, that would be a great way to do it. So when I ask them, what are the concerns that you have with increasing the amount of automated process you have in your security program, the answer is kind of twofold. The first is an underlying fear that something will go wrong. And the second part of that is that their backside will be on the line for that. So, falsing, something that affects critical business process and actually takes the company down, that would be a very bad thing that resulted from automation because you don't have a person there that's directly overseeing the process. The second part is, in the security space, it can be very difficult if you're in the security team to get the operations team to really be happy about deploying maintenance updates or new software or implementing a new process or opening a port or whatever it may be that you need. So if you take a credibility hit as a security team because your automated process broke something, it makes your downstream life a whole lot harder. Now, there's a number of factors in play that I'm seeing that actually have softened the position of organizations as it relates to embracing automation. And the first of those is just the ubiquitous nature of the threats that we're seeing right now. If we think about the threats that organizations face, they run the gambit of nation-state attacks, cyber criminals, hacktivism, and probably, almost worst of all, the people that you are supposed to be able to trust, your employees, your partners, the contractors that you bring into your organization. And it's just a reality of doing business today. Now, our labs organization at McAfee tracks a lot of the data relative to numbers of threats and those kinds of things. And what we saw in 2017 is, on average, and I want to make sure I get my statistics right on this, 44.1 billion queries per day are being processed by our global threat intelligence cloud. That means of all the customers that use our products who are sending a query out to our intelligence cloud to see if a file or a process is malicious, that happens 44.1 billion times a day. That's about 500,000 queries per second. That means there's enough odd activity out there that someone's sending something to us for inspection. In 2017, we saw a 32% increase in our sample database. That's a database of files that we have that we know to be malicious. There are 660 million samples in that database at this point in time. So if you just contemplate that for a moment, the security teams in your organization have to kind of keep an eye out for 660 million things that are known to be malicious in the world. That's becoming overwhelming for them. A second factor is really just oceans of data. When we begin to think about the amount of data that every organization has within its laptops, its server environments, its mobile devices, it becomes a little bit overwhelming what we're asking our IT and security organizations to keep track of and, more importantly, protect, because that data is instrumental in your business functioning and being able to deliver value to your customers. I was doing some research and prep for this presentation, obviously, and Domo created a report a while back that actually articulates that 90% of all the data in the world right now was produced in the last 2 years. Just think about that for a minute. What will that data pool look like 2 years from now? If in 2 years, 90% of what out there is right now, we created. So it's mind-blowing when you begin to think about the fact that your security teams and your organizations have to figure out how to protect that data when it's growing at such an exponential level. The third element that I think is really impacting, people's willingness to kind of look at automation as a way to solve some of these problems is really the complexity of the environments that they're having to protect. I started with McAfee in 2000. If I think about what my world looked like in 2000, most of the corporations I worked with had a few device types: servers, desktops, maybe a BlackBerry. Like if you wanted to use a mobile phone to get your access to your email in 2000 to 2005, you were using a BlackBerry or you weren't getting access to your email, right? You probably had a couple of OSs, maybe Windows. The execs got to have Macs. Nobody else did. You probably had some Unix variants in your server environments, but pretty small set of operating systems you were dealing with. You probably had a pretty tight network edge. Most of your employees probably worked on premise. I think back then, if I recall, maybe about 20% of large organizations had laptops, and they were all forced to VPN in. There was no Office 365 back then, right? So you start to think about that. The applications that you used had to be provisioned through the procurement group, so you had a pretty tight rein on applications. Now contemplate just how you work every day, let alone how your security team has to process stuff. But think about the world right now. You've got all kinds of devices. You don't just have servers and laptops and desktops. You've got mobile devices, tablets, virtual clients, virtual servers. You've got the whole workload in the cloud kind of thing going on. Well, that complicates things. You also now add to Windows, Mac, and Unix variants of Linux, variants of Android, so you've got additional operating systems you're dealing with. BlackBerries, I can't remember the last time I saw somebody with a BlackBerry. I loved my BlackBerry, but Android devices and Windows or Mac devices have taken over the mobile world. Whole nother level of complexity. And let's talk about applications for a minute. When was the last time anybody actually went to IT to get an app? I just go to my app store and download something that will do just as good a job as whatever they were going to give me. And oh, by the way, it cost me $4.99. So the world of control that was in place 15, 17 years ago when I started has changed very dramatically. And oh, by the way, I forgot to mention cloud. SaaS, IaaS, PaaS. So as companies begin to move workloads into the cloud environment, they begin to lose control over when updates occur. There's a whole different kind of agreement between those cloud providers and organizations, which has made people more comfortable with automatic updates. Maybe not more comfortable, but at least more accepting of automatic updates. Add to this the labor shortage, and we can debate the extent of labor shortage. I know that it's been pretty hyped over the course of the last couple of years. But the reality is there will be a labor shortage. We will have more jobs than we have skilled people in cybersecurity to fill them. In 2017, we did a survey of, I think it was just shy of 800 IT and security executives, talking with them about this topic to try to understand, is it hype, is it real, kind of, where's the middle ground on this? And universally, those folks, about 82% of them, so not universally, but a very high percentage, said that they have a cybersecurity shortage in their organization and in their geography. I believe we surveyed around 7 geographies, so there was a pretty good footprint, at least across Asia, Europe, and the US. Additionally, they also were extremely concerned about whether or not they would be able to fill the jobs that they had. And many projected that by 2020, 2022, somewhere between 7 and 16%, depending upon the country that you were in, their jobs would go unfilled. So some percentage of the cybersecurity jobs that they had open, they would be unable to fill. Now that doesn't mean that the need goes away. It doesn't mean that the work goes away. It means that you have to find a different way of addressing those challenges. And the final stat that came out of that I find interesting, especially given the topic I'm talking about is automation quandary, is that 9 of 10 respondents felt that the way that they would have to fill that talent gap was through technology. They would be looking to their technology partners to help them figure out how to fill that gap and solve those problems independent of being able to hire people into their organization. And the reality is, it's not a spending problem. Companies are spending a king's ransom on security. And yet, we continue to have this problem. So in that same survey, organizations felt that over the course of the next 5 years, their security budgets would increase at a pretty fair rate versus decrease. So they're already spending a lot of money, and they're projecting that they will spend more on cybersecurity. And yet the reality is that breaches continue to happen. If we look at this timeline, the latest of which was really the Equifax attack, where 143 million Americans were impacted by that particular breach. More than likely, everyone in this room, or at least a very large percentage of you, were probably touched by that. I think we'll continue to see the consequences of that breach for some time to come. And I'm not specifically picking on Equifax. Equifax is just the latest in a very long line of companies that had an issue, and that issue got discovered by a hacker and leveraged by that hacker. It could happen to any organization at any time. Now, if we look back at kind of how we've been approaching the security challenge, we began to really reevaluate the direction we wanted our security strategy as an organization to go back at the end of 2015-16. If you think about that time frame, there were a significant number of pretty severe breaches that happened at that point in time. And I'm not going to name names because, you know, they're a little bit old at this point. But the reality is, we talked to a lot of organizations as we were beginning to reformulate our strategic direction as a company. Where should we invest for the future? We talked to the market, we talked to analysts, customers. We also reached out to the incident responders in our pro services group. These are folks that actually get called by our customers to come out when a breach occurs and look at what happened. Have we really taken it all out of our environment? Do we still have little bits of it left? How do we get ourselves back on track? How do we have a better security practice subsequent to a breach to ensure that it doesn't happen in the future? And the results of those conversations were pretty interesting in that what they said is these companies had spent millions of dollars on security products. They didn't have C players on their security team. These were large organizations that had A players on their security team. Their executive teams were committed to a cybersecurity practice. They understood the importance of having a strong security practice, and yet they were breached. So what happened? And what they told us is what they found as they're going through the data and they're looking at these organizations was that yes, they had spent millions of dollars on security, but they had spent millions of dollars on security from many vendors and many partners, and none of those products actually talk to each other. They also found, as they dug through the data, that in some of those cases, they had actually detected the breach with a product, they had blocked the breach with the product, and they had reported it. And that data got funneled up into their SIM with all the other terabytes of data that was in their SIM. And at some point, someone in their SOC was going to discover that data. But someone at some point discovering the data was way too late for many of those organizations. So basically what happened is an attack occurred, the door got slammed in its face at one point, and it just went through an open window. Because the product that caught it was unable to share in real time the information of that breach with every other countermeasure in that environment, they were unable to have everything else learn from the initial attack. So we fundamentally believed at that point that the way we have to solve this as an industry is that we have to create integrated solutions that deliver cross-vendor, vendor-agnostic, threat intelligence sharing of information. That will be the only way that we can really move forward. And that's going to happen with some level of automation in that process. Now, we also think that as part of that, there's a place for both machines and humans. As we talk about, this automation, artificial intelligence, machine learning, there's lots of discussion about whether or not machines will make humans irrelevant, right? And the reality is that machines have special talents, and so do humans. And in the world of security specifically, machines are extremely good at gathering and analyzing large quantities of complex data. They can then output some results from that analysis, and humans can then take that output and begin to apply strategic intellect. So where machines are great at gathering and analyzing large quantities of data in a very rapid period of time, humans have two key things they bring to the table. Strategic intellect, the ability to look at the context around the data and interpret that context relative to the black and white bits that the computers looked at. And secondly, if you're about to have a machine make a critical decision for your organization that could result in some severe action being taken, I don't know, taking down a DNS server which controls all the communications in your organization, or maybe locking your CEO off the network because something on his system looks dodgy, it's good to have a human take a second look at that action before the big red button gets hit, because you want to make sure that it wasn't as a result of falsing or some misinterpretation of data. So we fundamentally believe that the combination of kind of that capability of machines to get through all of that content, humans to apply contextual understanding to the data machines output, plus automating a large part of that process will help organizations get to a point where they can at least stay even, if not get ahead of the attackers. Now, as we think about the automation quandary, we're at a point now where instead of organizations being reticent to embrace automation, they're beginning to look at it as a way to help them address some of these factors that we've just covered. And if we look at that just a little bit, why have they softened? Well, think about cloud. As you move to the cloud, if you're a SaaS, if you're leveraging SaaS applications, those SaaS vendors pretty much say, I'm going to push updates to your SaaS application. If you want to work with me, you'll accept that. Your infrastructure provider says, I'm going to update the infrastructure. It's going to happen on this schedule. You're good with that, right? And organizations say yes, because essentially they don't control the underlying infrastructure. They don't control the SaaS application. And this adoption of cloud environments and kind of the contractual elements that surround cloud adoption have begun to enable people to believe that automation can happen, and it can happen without taking down their organization. Now, if we look at kind of where we need to go, we fundamentally believe that we have to begin to build systems that deliver integrated workflows from endpoint to cloud to all the partners that play in that entire workflow. And in doing that, it's going to do three things. It will facilitate cross-countermeasure, vendor-agnostic communication and threat sharing. The ability for organizations to catch something at one point in the network and have the fact that that was caught be shared with every other point of presence in that network, so that you don't get in the situation where 3 weeks after a breach goes public, you find out you actually blocked it at some point. That's not a good day. Secondly, it reduces the need for human intervention in the most manual of tasks in your organization. And given that one of your most difficult and precious resources to hold and retain right now is cybersecurity human talent, the ability to save that talent for your most critical and difficult investigations will become increasingly more important for your cybersecurity teams. And finally, it delivers a robust policy management and analytics engine that essentially allows your teams to focus on the operations of the security process itself. Now, the last part of that is your teams then become a safeguard for the automation. So there will always be this innate part of every security professional, which is, paranoid. I think if you're in the security industry, you're innately paranoid. After 17 years, my brother and my husband tell me when we go on vacation together, I'm no longer allowed to talk to people. Like, my brother went to Hawaii a few years ago and he goes, Candace, that guy in the art gallery is never going on the internet again, so don't do that. I think you begin to get to that point where everything you see or read, you start to look for like, wow, that's a privacy issue. Wow, that's a security issue. And so you can't help but be paranoid. And so I think that having the ability to leverage your humans as an oversight for the machines and the automation you put in place will continue to be critical. And so as we look at the future, I I fundamentally believe that automation can be a medium through which we can solve some of these problems, but it will have to happen at an industry level, not just an individual vendor, company, government level. Our organization opened up a technology called the data exchange layer to other organizations. We actually open sourced some of the APIs for that. We have competitors playing in that space. We have great partners like Cisco, Checkpoint, and others who become a part of that data exchange layer partner program. And it essentially allows the sharing of threat intelligence information in real time. We believe as an industry that we've come to the conclusion at this point that in order to solve this problem for our customers, for our competitors' customers, that we're going to have to come together as an industry and begin to work together. And we believe through partnerships, through integration, through automation, we'll be better able to thwart the very aggressive attacks that we're beginning to see in the market and will continue to see in the market going forward.